Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Define Disaster. This is Battlefield 4, and today we're going to be looking at the all-knowing Recon Loadout. The Recon class is probably not your typical TDM class choice for Battlefield 4, and there's a number of reasons for that. One, of course, that you have no access to healing because you're not a medic. Second, you don't have access to munition because you're not a support player, and you don't even have the advantage of the quite powerful PDWs. So there's no real reason, unless you really are a fantastic sniper, to use the Recon class in Battlefield 4 for TDM. However, there is one way you can play TDM with a Recon quite effectively, and that is with the help of both the Tugs and the Motion Ball sensors. So I wanted to find out how effective this loadout really was and where and when it was best used. So before we get into where and when it is best used, I should probably tell you what we were actually using. So we were obviously going with the Recon class, and as primary I chose usually something like an ACWR, an MTAR, or the A91, simply because those are very reliable and good close quarter to medium range carbines, available obviously to every class because they are carbines. Now for a secondary we went with the G18. I didn't have to use that too often, but it's simply a solid choice for a pistol and for close quarter engagement, which is basically what this combat was going to be centered around. Now for the gadgets, as already mentioned, we chose the motion balls for gadget 1 and the tugs as gadget 2. Now the motion balls' main purpose was basically to allow us to move around the map and know where our enemy is, while the tugs was usually set up in a place where enemies frequently would come by and combat would frequently take place, so we could usually have them spotted on the map as soon as they entered the area. When it comes to class upgrades, I chose to go for the offensive upgrade simply because that is usually the most effective in TDM, because you're quick to run out of munition as soon as you go on any decent kill streak. Map choice was equally important in getting the best out of this loadout, and to do that I chose the TDM version of Zavod. Now there's a number of reasons for it, but the first and foremost is that the combat is centered around a very central area in the map, which is mainly close quarter, offers plenty of cover, and offers plenty of places to hide my tugs, which of course I needed to conceal from enemies, or else they would simply destroy it as soon as they found it. This way I was able to maintain the operation of the tug for extended periods of time and peek out and surprise my enemies from behind the wealth of cover that was available. Now, most interestingly, did it actually improve my gameplay? Was I a more effective player because of this loadout? And this is very hard to tell because every TDM game varies, your score varies, your performance varies, you yourself as person vary, so it's always very difficult to tell whether or not there was a large, I say, performance increase because of this specific loadout. However, I do personally believe it did help to a certain extent. However, there was a number of factors that limited the success of this loadout in itself, and if they were not present, could have probably made this loadout even stronger. Now, first and foremost, the lack of a med pack is definitely a hindrance to this loadout. Now that's unavoidable simply because you're playing the Recon class, but it's definitely a bummer in TDM because finding a friendly med pack can sometimes prove very difficult. Another difficulty was getting the tugs in a good location where your enemy wouldn't find it. Because after a few times placing it in the same location, eventually people would find it and they would learn that I would be placing it there. So they would continuously destroy it and I would have to find a new place to hide it. Now not only does this cost time, but it leaves you vulnerable because you're concentrating on something other than the possibility of somebody rounding the corner and shooting you in the face. Now having the motion balls obviously did help, and they let you move around the map a little bit more while maintaining this kind of minimap awareness of your enemy. However, they eventually do run out and it's still a distraction. So in the end, placing down the tugs is always, I would say, a little bit more dangerous than once you actually have it down. Another problem is the situationality of the tugs. Because TDM tends to kind of flow back and forth between the sides of the maps, the tugs wasn't always in a good position. So I put it in the center of the map, and there would be combat in the center of the map, but then my team would either get pushed out of the center or we would push the enemy out of the center, from which point on I would actually be reliant on the 3 motion balls I had with me. Once they ran out, I had absolutely no aid whatsoever. And then of course you're at a serious disadvantage to somebody like an assault player who can heal up as soon as you shoot him. You of course are not able to do that, which is kind of a bummer. Now the last point is kind of a minor point, but it's worth mentioning, and that's I found as player I was fixating my attention much more on the minimap. Now this is good. Paying attention to your minimap is basic skill for Battlefield. That's no news. However, if you put too much or you devote too much of your attention to the minimap, you lose concentration on what's going actually on in the game. You're not paying attention to audio cues or where your teammates are dying, simply on those enemy red dots. So I noticed that it was to a certain degree slightly more distracted, and this kind of showed sometimes in my aiming skills or reaction times, as you may or may not have noticed in this clip here. So what is the verdict on this loadout? Well, it's definitely effective. However, one should note it's effective in very specific situations. That is close quarter, plenty of cover, and plenty of places to hide your tugs with a wealth of enemies continuously coming back to the same spot. And this isn't present on every TDM map, that's for sure. While there are plentiful Battlefield 4 TDM close quarter maps such as Dawnbreaker for example, or Operation Locker, or Siege of Shanghai's TDM version, most of them don't fulfill all or any of the criteria that are needed to make this loadout effective. For example, Dawnbreaker doesn't provide enough places to hide your tugs. Siege of Shanghai, on the other hand, doesn't provide a consistent combat area. Now what I mean by that is that the combat generally shifts throughout the map, making the placement of a tug impractical because after 30 seconds and 2 dead enemies, you're going to have to move on to find new enemies in a different part of the map. So the loadout is very effective in very limited situations, such as Zavod TDM. So if you want to try it out, I would definitely recommend trying it out on this specific map that you've seen me play throughout this video. And with that being said, all has been said. Now, if you have experience with this loadout yourself, please do leave a comment below and tell me how you made it work, on which maps and with what tactics. If you have any other comments related to the video Battlefield 4 or future ideas or criticism, the comments are down there below for you as well. I will of course be reading them, but otherwise thank you very much for watching, and I will see you all in the next Battlefield video.